So this will be a laid-back, unprofessional reading of the Words of the Prophets book by me. There is a feature on YouTube when you have the video pulled up and there is a bar at the bottom and there is a little gear. So if you click on your screen and it brings up a bar on the bottom and there's a little gear symbol, a circle with the spokes. You can click on that and change the playback speed to slow me down. You can pick 0.75 or 0.5 and slow me down, because I'm going to read at a native, or it is an English speaker speed, not as a foreigner speed. So if you are from a foreign country, you can listen to this and still understand what I am saying, because I'm going to say it in my voice at my normal speed, but you can slow it down to 1 or 0.75, I suggest. If you slow it down to 0.5, it will sound slow, slow, slow. But so do not slow down to 0.5. Slow down to 0.75. 0.75 will be the key. So let me start with the book. The book's title is Words of the Prophets by Peter Jack Benson. It is about spirituality. It is about the perennial philosophy. And it is about this philosophy that believes all world religions have some truth to them. It is not here to convert you, it is here to teach and educate. It will describe a lot of things. It is my hope that I can bring you a simple understanding of these texts that I've researched for 3 years. The title, Words of the Prophets, comes from a song. The song goes, "Words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls, and echo in the sound of silence." I'm singing a cappella, so I'm not in tune. But this book is strange because it's copywritten 2023. But truly, this book is in a format as a free download that can be listened to or read whenever, right? But the free download is, the link will be in my bio, and the free download is updating. It's a living document. So the preface says this: think of this book as the Bible, a book with a message meant to change the world for the better. Be kind to anybody mentioned in this book. Don't jump to conclusions. Be critical and skeptical. I never thought this would get famous. This book doesn't make money in PDF form, by the way. Never has, never will. It's not about the money. Be aware this is a living document, meaning that the file has the potential to periodically update, though it should remain in much the same form. None of this book has professionally been edited or formatted. Feel free to pass this link on to anybody you like. In fact, I encourage it. So if at any point during this text I feel like adding something, I will. To you right now as we speak. Let me make a note of something. Someone just messaged me and I need to make a note to talk to them. That, for instance, is something that I will do. But I will say pause. Pause from reading, I will say. So you know when I'm adding something. Let's start with the first 3 pages. Okay? Because it's set up as it's split into sections like essays and letters and journals. I'm only going to read to you from the section that's split up like letters and essays. The journals themselves are featured as a secondary part of the book, as a link within the book, meaning there's hypertext, which leads you to another file. So the journals are featured. There's also a section called Part 1, Connor, which is featured, which is a short novel about entheogenic substance use of hallucinogens for religious and spiritual purposes, that also goes into much of what is talked about in the rest of the book in a more conversational matter. But the book is very conversational as it is. So that's why I need to say pause during this book, because you will think I am reading from the book because it is in my voice, and you know no different. If I pause periodically to drink water, it's because I'm thirsty. First 3 pages. I grew up in a house near the edge of a small town in southern Wisconsin. 12,000 people. 2 blocks in one direction, you'd end up in a cornfield. 6 blocks the other way, you'd be downtown. There are a bunch of stoplights. It's not that small. If you're trying to picture Wisconsin, begin with cornfields, add in pastures with cows, all hilly, and top it off with a lot of woods. It's very green outside, excluding our major cities of Madison and Milwaukee. Honestly, Madison's still pretty green. I'm not used to going to Milwaukee. I live in a ranch. I have some mental health issues. Bipolar disorder, anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, substance abuse disorder. I haven't changed since I was a kid, and I was a difficult kid. I was always worried about being a disappointment. That's changing, finally. I'm finally beginning to not give a shit what people think, but the truth is, that's a hard proposition. We often let others' opinions define our sense of self. I don't think that's healthy, though. I think there ought to be a good balance between how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us. I don't actually know how others perceive me. Most people don't say anything. You wonder what I look like, probably. I'm 33, a 1990 baby, average height, bearded with gray streaks in the beard, brown long curly hair, and a dad bod. I normally wear a short sleeve button-up, preferably linen, with some khaki shorts or pants, and some Birkenstocks, either clogs or sandals. I smell like a combination of sweat and cologne and cigarettes. I'm obsessive about the sweat smell. It worries me that I smell bad, but honestly, I rarely leave the house. I don't drive. I had a DUI a couple years back and sold my car. I have been told my voice is soothing. What else would you like to know? Should we treat this as a first dating site chat? I love music, books, and movies. I love Italian, Mexican, Asian, Greek, and classic American comfort foods. If I were to pick out a favorite movie genre, horror. Favorite music genre, folks, country, singer-songwriter stuff. Favorite author? That's tough. A link or a tie between Jack Kerouac, Cormac McCarthy, and James Fry. Should I write like them and omit quotation marks? It'll be harder for you, the reader. Sometimes I write plays instead of prose. I like that it's simple, just action and dialogue with a dusting of setting. What's my preferred communication style? Not yelling, which my parents prefer. I like assertiveness. It's hard to yell at me if I'm talking in a calm voice. It's a good trick. What else would you like to know? I see a therapist. I'm on meds. They help me from crashing so hard I lose all hope in life. I play guitar and piano and sing. I wish I had a piano. I smoke cigarettes. Not a big fan of pot. It makes me feel lazy and heavy. I don't drink anymore. I might be self-destructive once in a while and drink knowing I'm going to feel like crap, hoping somehow it'll be different this time. It never works. I like hallucinogens. I usually take LSA and DXM, and I can talk more about those later. They are fascinating, especially for their psychological benefits and spiritual qualities. There's no such thing as a good or bad drug. It's the way we use them. Sorry, someone sent me a message. There's no such thing as a good or bad drug. It's the way we use them. Heroin is great if you have pain. Meth is great if you're feeling lazy. I'm not suggesting either of those, by the way. I think education is important when it comes to drugs. I'm not encouraging drug use, but I will educate you on the use of hallucinogens. This is very important. Always follow your doctor's advice and be skeptical and cautious of hallucinogens, for the side effects and interactions can be damaging. We do not know the long-term side effects. Don't everybody go out and do it. We'd be a giant science experiment and destroy the world. So don't go out and do what I'm talking about, but rather learn from my experience. If you're interested in hallucinogens, do your own research. The doses I've taken are extremely high, and I do not recommend them to anybody. A good documentary on them would be this, The Nature of Ayahuasca, on YouTube, and there's a link to that. I'm gay, sort of. Let me explain. I'm attracted to men, but not really in a sexual way. Am I asexual? I can't say that. I could say that, sorry, but it's just one word, a simple label. It doesn't actually mean anything. Homoromantic asexual? I'm going to try and explain it over the course of this book. By the way, this book has never been edited, never even seen spell check. I apologize for that, but I don't really feel like dishing out money for some fancy writing program. I used to win spelling bees, but that still doesn't cure the occasional error. What is this book? It should make sense of who I am, how I think, and what I do, and it is my attempt to change the world for the better by spreading some sense of spirituality that we have been lacking. I may fail at this venture. It's more important to try than to worry about failing. I've been trying to write this book for 3 frickin' years. I already wrote 100,000, or sorry, not 100,000. I already wrote about 1,400 pages, and I'll include some of that stuff. Some essays and journal entries. The more nagging question I would have if I were you is this: what do I do with my life? I teach guitar lessons. I have one student, my mother. I also am some weird blend of things: life coach, spiritual teacher, and friend. I guide people and support them when they are struggling with life, primarily people 11 to 30. Those happen to be the tough years, the search for self, the transition to teen, the transition to adult, the transition from the label adult to actually being stable. I haven't 100% figured out the actual stable thing myself, but I'm here to bounce ideas off of, to offer a different perspective. I've been through some shit. We'll talk about that as well. So guitar teacher, life coach, spiritual counselor, author. I perform sometimes with my guitar as well. I sing as well. Apparently I've adopted Jack Kerouac's love of the hyphen to mimic the natural way I talk. This happens to be metafiction as well. I once wrote in my journal, on 2/23/21, I'll begin this masterpiece tomorrow and show Woolf, Joyce, and Proust and Kerouac how it's done. I made sure to add a tongue sticking out face as well. Proust wrote his on his deathbed, Jack between crazy adventures. Me, it's my therapy. Through it, I can analyze all sorts of things, my sense of the world, of love, of sexuality, of religion, of mental health, everything of importance to me. I originally went to college to be a high school English teacher, dropped out due to depression, got a degree in recording music instead. The truth is, I'm still a teacher at heart. Should I give you homework? There's a book, Ulysses, by Joyce, that actually suggested books to read prior to it, as well as a guidebook. That's just silly. On the other hand, if I mention some songs and stuff, it's not mandatory. The book will make sense without them. It will just add to the book if you're bored and want to expand your mind. Expand your mind. That sounds like some pretentious bullshit. Before we start, let's discuss something. Book banning. Should this book have a rating? Is it inappropriate for individuals under the age of 18? That leaves a lot of moral judgments on what is simply an explanation of how a human thinks and lives. I think being critical and open-minded are 2 qualities to cherish, and both are required for everything in this world, art included. Judgmentalness, on the other hand, useless. Judgmentalness supposes that you are better than me, or that your way is the right way. According to Nietzsche, paraphrasing here, there is no right way or wrong way, there is just your way and my way. As pointed out in a post on Facebook, banning a book to protect one person is stating that it's less important to protect the individual mentioned in the book. A book, after all, is a mirror in which we see ourselves. Is that what people who ban books are afraid of? Seeing parts of themselves they may not understand or want to acknowledge? Carl Jung would have had something to say about that. He called it our shadow. He said not to fear it, but to integrate it into the whole of our being, thus becoming whole. Are you ready for puzzle piece 1? Then there is a little opening credits song. It's song BS number 2 by Charles Mingus. And there's a link to that. And then it begins part 2, the essays. There's a list of the essays, all with page numbers. I'm not going to list them off right here. I will put links to each of the essays title in below, so you can click on whichever you like. If you want to jump ahead or to listen to specific ones, that is totally your option. The book is meant to be read as a whole, though, so don't expect it to make any sense. Each essay should be self-explanatory, but the book makes most sense as a whole, because there are some letters to people. The first essay, is called Genesis. There isn't a way to talk about religion without pissing someone off. If a Catholic reads this book, they may scream blasphemy. If an atheist reads this book, they may scream Jesus freak. I'm going to do my best to just be me in that case. This book is meant to highlight my journey of spirituality as well as start a dialogue. It's my part in encouraging a world with less suffering, less hostility, and more love. I'm a hippie, right? It's a book about all sorts of things, seen through the lens of my perception. These things include religion, psychology, sociology, and philosophy. It is my job to make these subjects accessible and enjoyable for the reader. That being said, I have two requests for you while you are reading this book. Have an open mind and be critical. By this I mean suspend your judgment for a bit. If this were a fantasy book, you'd suspend your judgment for the course of the book, and you'd go on journeys with wizards and magic birds and evil spirits. To see the world through my eyes, you may have to suspend your disbelief as well. This may be difficult, because we are about to discuss religion. Religion tends to be one of the subjects that separates us. It makes people uncomfortable. We come at it from whatever belief system we hold, and we frequently build a wall up so we don't have to hear about somebody else's beliefs. My aim is not to convert or deter you from any belief system, whether it's Catholic, atheist, Buddhist, Taoist, Muslim, whatever you believe. My aim is to discuss my journey from Catholic to agnostic to perennial philosopher. I will show you some answers I've come to in the first half of the book, as well as show you how I got to those answers in the second half of the book. Since part of this journey involves Christianity, I will be retelling a handful of the biblical stories in my own words. I can't expect you to have read the Bible, after all. You may be Muslim, or Buddhist, or atheist. For now, let's start with the beginning. Once upon a time there was God. What is God? That's a whole other subject. Right now let's imagine it's an old man in the sky with long white hair and a big white beard. This God decided to create something out of nothing, for at that time all that existed was God. No YouTube, no cavemen, no squirrels, not even a rock. When God created something, God created a universe, and within that universe a planet, a big floating ball in space, and put a bunch of things on it, including land, water, animals, and finally a dude named Adam. God saw Adam was lonely, so one of Adam's ribs was pulled out, and from it Eve was created. God looked at them and said, "Don't you dare eat from that fruit of knowledge." They didn't eat it until one day a snake talked to Adam and tempted her to take a bite. She told Adam and both ate the fruit. God was pissed and kicked them out of this garden, a paradise where everything lived happily according to nature's plan. Then God stationed some angels, spirits with wings, who held flaming swords at the entrance to Eden, so Eve and Adam couldn't return. Letter to an American atheist. Monster energy drink? Got it. In Jack Kerouac's day, it would have been some amphetamines. Johnny Cash on the CD player? American too. In Kerouac's day, it might have been some Charles Mingus. I know religion makes us put up walls. It makes us defensive and argumentative and a little uncomfortable, or a lot. When discussing belief in atheism in America, there's one type of vocal atheism, which I call anti-theism. It's more than a lack of belief, it's anti-belief. It's typically against one religion in particular, Christianity, which is the main religion of the U.S. Let me ask you some questions. What do you think about religion? What do you think about God? Should we do a lowercase God instead? Sure. This Johnny Cash is too slow right now. Let's put on a mix of Radiohead. This God thing doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? An old man in the sky who must be the cause of all this suffering and craziness? A talking snake doesn't make much sense either. A virgin birth, a guy rising from the dead? Science would say, where's the proof? A skeptical mind would say, but look at all the horrors Christianity has called, and I would agree, I'm a skeptic. I was raised Catholic and around the age of 11 decided I didn't believe it one bit. I remained agnostic for the longest time, and I'm still opposed to organized religion. I started using hallucinogens a couple years ago and began having strange experiences, many of which included a sense of ego death. Ego is the thing that separates me and you from the rest of the world. To feel it vanish and become one with everything, that's mind-blowing. The things I saw were mind-blowing. I didn't see any geometric patterns or elves or worlds. I saw this world with things manifesting in it, a tear in the fabric of the world, demonic things on the TV, etc. Even more important, I saw through the weird game we call life. What do I mean? I saw two people talking, a police officer and a driver, and I realized in an instant that we just make it all up. Police officers don't actually have authority, other than a gun and a billy club. It's like stage acting, and we're each given a part. As long as we play along, it becomes real. We stop being part of the play, we break the fourth wall, and all of it comes crumbling down. It's belief in many things that make them real. Gender, for instance. There are people who with different genitalia, that's undeniable, but then we begin to apply other characteristics to these individuals and label them as man and woman, and that's where we start playing the game. Somebody might have a penis, but that doesn't say a darn thing about how they should operate in the world, does it? Can the same be said for God? Does believing in God make it real? Notice I said it, not him. Is God a man? Does it look like us? Have desires like us? Get angry like us? We're not just talking about Christianity here. We're talking about every religion. One of the things that bothers me about some religions is their exclusivity, their belief that there is one right way to believe and act. Is there even such a thing as an objective truth? Science measures things, right? It looks at pieces and measures them, breaks them into smaller pieces, and creates theories based upon these findings. Science is in constant development, so that in 100 years the answers we now label as fact may be regarded as false, laughable even. Does that mean it's not a fact right now? I'm definitely not encouraging anybody to rush to a church and accept Jesus into their life. The phrase accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior probably makes some of you throw up in your mouth a little. It gives me the shivers. What does it mean for him to be Lord and Savior? Who was Jesus? Who is he now? How is he related to the Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad? Is Jesus a historical figure? It doesn't matter, really. He's a symbol, a tale, a role model for how to act. You don't have to believe in heaven or hell, that he rose from the dead, any of that. I'm not here to convince you of any of that. I don't believe most of it. I certainly don't believe in heaven or hell, not as places. I view them as states. Do you know what Buddha nature is? It's the state of enlightenment, realizing you're not suffering. The Christian term would be Christ consciousness. When we think of Christians, we think of Baptists, Catholics, Pentecostals. We think of what we may have been raised as, what we decided not to believe in. It's critical, I believe, to abandon the indoctrinated belief of Christianity, or whatever religion you may have been raised as, if you were indeed raised in a religious environment. To not do so is be a sheep, to blindly follow a master. The same can be said of science, though, right? We rarely think like scientists. Instead, we rely on what we have been already told. We don't work at disproving it. I mentioned my hallucinogenic experiences. Well, they had a certain feeling to them, something spiritual. I saw there was something at play. You might say, but those were caused by chemicals. Does that make them any less valid? Our whole worldview of the world is caused by chemicals, light reaching the eye, vibrations reaching the eardrum, neurons firing, causing our image of the world. Ayahuasca, an entheogen used in the Amazon, causes visions, some kind of spiritual awakening. We can define religion as an organized belief system. So what is spirituality? It's hard to pin down. It could be seen as an interconnectedness between all of creation. That's the way I view it. It's the acknowledgement of something larger than us. I don't mean an old man in the sky, though. I mean something beyond that. Does that something dictate books to humans or send angels down? Not in my opinion. Humans make religions out of revelation, of these hallucinatory experiences, ecstatic seizures. Humans write the books, humans make the rules, and the rules are a good guideline for how to behave. On a forum I'm part of, a frequent question is, can atheists truly be moral without religion? The truth is, we'll never know, because religion exists, therefore influences our behaviors and the laws and social norms we have. What am I even getting at if I'm not encouraging religion? I'm getting at a sense of open-mindedness, a lens in which we can look at religion without converting. We can learn. I've never stopped learning. I think that's crucial for everybody. The reason people stop learning is complicated. Teachers bore the shit out of us. We get busy with work. We're arrogant enough to think that because we went to college, that we know everything we need to know. My path has been odd. A Catholic-born agnostic who used hallucinogen and now researches religion. I hope you come along this path with me. It's not my goal to convince you of anything, just to show you a different way of thinking about such a widespread, influential topic. I hope it's enjoyable, too. I'm not a scholar, after all. I'm a guy, and I think that's important. I'm not here to write you a dissertation on Christian ritual. That would be frickin' boring as hell. It's interesting being born in this technological age because of what we're exposed to, philosophy, psychology, all of it. We get to jump ahead and connect the dots into new theories based upon that which came before us. Quantum field theory, the multiverse, AI. It's a weird world, isn't it? The next section is a retelling of 4 stories from the Bible, told in my words. The note to reader says, these stories are taken from various sources including the Torah, the New American Bible, the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, the New Testament David Bentley Hart, the King James Bible, and the books of Enoch. It starts with the story of Abraham. God told Abraham to give his son Isaac as a burnt offering. Abraham built an altar and lay his son on the wood to be lit. God stopped Abraham before he lit the wood. God, impressed by Abraham's obedience, blessed Abraham in further generations. Noah. After Adam and Eve leave the Garden of Eden, they have 2 children, Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel and is banished, marked by God. Another son is born, Seth. For your sake, I will not list the entire lineage from Seth to Noah, but will highlight the more important figures. Enoch, Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, Lamech, Noah's father, and finally we have Noah. Between the time of the Garden of Eden and Noah, there were angels which fell in love with humans, were banished from heaven, and taught mankind all sorts of things, many of which ended up in the wars between the humans. Man became wicked. Noah, though, walked with God, remaining righteous. Noah had an unnamed wife and 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. God spoke to Noah, warning of a coming flood which would purify the earth from the wickedness. Noah was told to create an ark in which he, his family, and 2 of every wild animal would live during the flood, escaping God's wrath to repopulate the earth. After the building of the ark, the flood comes. Eventually the waters subside and Noah sends out a bird to find land. One day the bird comes back with a twig and they know they are safe. God speaks yet again, showing Noah a rainbow, stating that the rainbow is a sign of a new covenant between God and humanity, that God will never again cleanse the world with a flood. Moses. During a time in Egypt, when Hebrews were used as slaves to build palaces for the Egyptian pharaohs, there was a boy born, a Hebrew boy. His lineage was kept secret, and he was raised by the Egyptian royal family as one of their own. As a young man, Moses, the Hebrew boy, witnesses the horrors and suffering of the Hebrew people and kills an Egyptian slave driver. He flees from the Pharaoh. God remembers a covenant to his people, and while Moses is on Mount Horeb, God appears in the form of a burning bush and speaks to Moses. To punish the Egyptians and force them to free the Hebrews, God sends 10 plagues. Moses then takes his people to the Red Sea, where they narrowly escape the Egyptian soldiers when he splits the sea in 2 by the power of God. After crossing the sea, Moses comes to Mount Sinai, where he receives the words for the 10 commandments of God, which state that one must not harm others or God. Jesus, the longest story. Descended from King David, Jesus is born to a virgin, Mary, thus fulfilling a prophecy of the Messiah from the Hebrew prophets. He does not read, but often speaks the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, in debates with the older Hebrews at the synagogue. His teenage years and 20s are left a mystery, and then the next thing we know of him, he is being baptized in the Jordan River by John the Baptist, a crazy ascetic or monk who lives in the desert, living off very little. As Jesus comes out of the water, the Spirit of God appears in the form of a dove, and God speaks. In this act, John fulfills his destiny of the second coming of the prophet Elijah, spoken by the prophets. Jesus then disappears into the desert, where he is tempted by an evil force and succeeds in keeping righteous. Coming out of the desert, he begins his ministry, teaching and performing miracles. He heals, he exorcises demons, he forgives sins, he calms a storm, he walks on water and raises the dead. His followers witness him being surrounded by 2 dead prophets, calling this the Transfiguration. He begins to give predictions of his death. One of the most important teachings is one of the 2 most important commandments of God, to love God and your neighbor. He criticizes the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, a sect of the Jewish people, and they see him as a rebellious threat. His last night he prays to God in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he begs that death may be different, but allows God to make the final decision. He is handed over by a disciple to the authorities, who put him through a short trial, deem him blasphemous, and is finally sent to a Roman politician, Pontius Pilate, who lets the Jewish people choose what is to become of Jesus. They decide he is to be crucified, and he begins a torturous journey of abuse in carrying the giant crucifix up the hill, Golgotha, where he is to die. He dies on the cross, and after being taken down, is buried behind a large stone which is guarded by Romans to prove he doesn't rise from the dead like the prophecies say. On the third day, upon coming to the tomb with spices to cover up his smell, they find him gone. His ghost arrives to Mary Magdalene first, his closest disciple, a righteous woman who had given up her sinful life of prostitution to follow Jesus. He appears to other disciples and finally ascends into the heavens. One day, his disciples are overcome with the Spirit of God and are able to speak in every language. That day is called the Pentecost. They begin to preach, spreading his word. Alpha and Omega. We have physical bodies that die. We can't walk on water. We can't conjure up fire by snapping our fingers. The word for this is limited. Squirrels are limited. A rock is limited. A rock doesn't take up all the space in the universe. A rock is something we can understand. We understand it by using measurements, science, math, and language. Each of these are limited. They measure the smaller things in existence. To quote the Tao Te Ching, a religious text written by Lao Tzu in China 500 years before Christ, naming is the origin of all particular things. How do we measure the big picture? There are theories that try to explain the big picture. To quote Stephen Hawking in the book The Theory of Everything, if we do discover a complete theory, it should in time be understandable in broad principle by everyone, not just a few scientists. Then we shall all be able to take part in a discussion of why the universe exists. If we find the answer to that, it should be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God. Hawking was an atheist. The interesting thing is, the more one researches physics, the more adept one is in the quantum theory, the more inclined to religious belief one may be. People are often limited in their speech and thought when trying to explain the big picture. Let's start with the word unlimited. I already acknowledged the existence of limited things, which I'm betting you agree with. The Tao Te Ching acknowledges an important concept in developing language, the concept of mutually arising things, which is symbolized by the yin-yang symbol. Specifically, it says, when people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly. That means for each word we create to communicate reality, we create two concepts, two words. For instance, if all licorice were black, we wouldn't call it black licorice. We would simply call it licorice. The same is true for humans. If there were only black-skinned people, we wouldn't refer to them as black, only as people. For black implies another color, whether it's orange or magenta or white. Good implies bad. Limited implies unlimited. The interesting thing about the unlimited is that it is not just a concept, but by definition, a reality. If the unlimited is truly unlimited, it must exist or be manifest in reality, otherwise it would be limited to non-existence. Unlimited is an adjective, though, so is limitless. Limitlessness could be considered a noun, but it's rather cumbersome. Let's use the word Tao, which literally translates from Chinese to English as the way or path. The translation itself shows the limited nature of language, for the Tao Te Ching states, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. This Tao is the noun for the reality of the concept of unlimited. By definition, the Tao encompasses all of creation, the whole universe, for to have something outside of the Tao would imply the Tao is limited. This concept is what's known as non-duality. In many belief systems, we think of things in dual terms, two, such as good and evil, harmony and discord, black and white. The Tao Te Ching proposes an alternative to this thinking, that all of existence is within something that is limitless. This thing could be labeled universe. Is there something outside of the universe, though? Possibly. Well, that means the universe is limited, so the universe is within the Tao. Is there such a thing as one universe? The Tao can't be perceived. Smaller than an electron, it contains uncountable galaxies, meaning there is more than one galaxy, in fact, limitless galaxies. This is what is known as the theory of the multiverse. If there are limitless galaxies, there are not only limitless possibilities, but limitless realities. This concept of the Tao, the unlimited thing, is quite far-reaching. In fact, it is all-reaching. Quote, it flows through all things, inside and outside, unquote. The Tao Te Ching. There are synonyms for the Tao as well. It's not limited to Taoism. One such word is Brahman, which is discussed at length in the Upanishads, which are part of the ancient Hindu Vedic texts that began to be documented in Sanskrit 1,500 years before Christ in India. Upanishad means teaching. Quote, reveal to me the Brahman that is manifest, not hidden, that is the self within everything, unquote. The word self being a translation of Atman. Brahman is the whole, Atman the unique individual manifestation or aspect of the whole. Think of a prism for a second. A light goes into the prism on one side and is cast into a variety of hues on the other. The hues are aspects of the light. The light is the Brahman, the hues the Atman, manifestations of the emanating source. In Hinduism, the term Maya is meant to relate an illusion of separateness between the Brahman and Atman. We see small parts of the whole as separate from the whole. For instance, we look at humans as separate things, divided by a concept called the ego. But the ego is an illusion. It is a concept. Belief in the ego creates the reality of the illusion. To compare this concept, let's look at a baseball game. A bunch of men throw a ball and hit a ball and catch a ball and run around. Physically, that is all that's going on, but to the participants and viewers, something much more is going on. Home runs, strikes, and the like. These concepts manifest by belief in them. If we didn't believe in the concepts of the game would be uninteresting, a limp version of itself. Ego is the same. It is part of a game, the game being society. If a person was born in solitude, lived in solitude, and died in solitude, they have no need for an ego, which is the sense of self as separate from external realities. We develop an ego to communicate with the world and to differentiate ourselves from others. Ego was a major concept of both Freud, an Austrian psychologist, and Jung, a Swiss psychologist, who knew each other during the early 1900s. Jung went on to discuss the concept of persona, which is the mask we wear for the world, which can change based on the audience. Around children, we may behave differently than we do at a bar with friends. Let me drink of water. These concepts, ego and persona, are part of the Maya, the illusion of separateness. Even in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, resurrection is for the spirit, not the body. For the physical world is the illusion, states the treatise of resurrection. Quote, homage to Brahman, homage to you, Vayu. You are Brahman manifest. I will speak of you as Brahman manifest, quote unquote. Upanishads. The Atman is an aspect of the Brahman manifest, a unique individual, unique but not separate from the whole, except by concepts such as ego and persona. The Brahman is spoken of as a person. One of the individuals speaking in the Upanishads says, quote, do not talk about me to him. I worship him as the companion that never leaves us, unquote. They've taken the concept of the unlimited and began to refer to it as an entity. He. This is done frequently, for humans have a hard time understanding certain concepts that cannot be drawn or spoken, the unlimited being the most incomprehensible of all. This incomprehensibility is one of the defining characteristics of the Tao or Brahman. Quote, let us know him as supreme, great Lord of lords, supreme deity of deities, supreme master of masters, beyond the God, worshipful Lord of the world. For him there exists nothing to be done, and no organ of action, his equal or superior, cannot be seen. His supreme power is revealed to be manifold. The action of his knowledge and strength is by his nature. He has no master in the world, no ruler, nor any mark. He is the cause, the overlord of overlords of action. He has no begetter, nor any overlord, unquote. The Upanishads say, which is echoed in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the sacred Gnostic texts of Christianity. Quote, the one is the great invisible spirit. We shall not think of it as a god or like a god, for it is greater than a god because it has nothing over it and no lord above it, unquote. The Nag Hammadi gives it many descriptions. Quote, illimitable, unfathomable, immeasurable, invisible, eternal, unutterable, and unnameable, unquote. As well as, quote, the one is not corporeal and it is not incorporeal, unquote. Corporeal relating to having a form, such as a corpse. This one, the unlimited, must be able to manifest in a corporeal form, for to deny it the ability to manifest would be limit it to the incorporeal. It is everywhere. The great Tao flows everywhere, or as Jesus says in the Nag Hammadi, quote, "Split a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." Unquote. When talking of the kingdom of heaven, many relate it to a place. But in the Nag Hammadi, Jesus states, "If your leaders say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the heaven,' then the birds of heaven will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside you, and it is outside you." The kingdom of heaven, therefore, appears to be something close to the concept of the Tao, which is the unlimited. Now, if we take this Tao, or the One, or Brahman, and begin to apply it to certain other concepts, things get interesting. The concept of natural order seems almost to be the same thing as the Tao, in fact. If powerful men and women, this is a quote, "If powerful men and women could remain centered in the Tao, all things would be in harmony. The world would become a paradise, all people would be at peace, and the law would be written in their hearts." Unquote. In the Christian and Jewish telling of the creation and fall of man in Genesis, the animals do not eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. The animals, and thereby remain as they were in the garden, innocent and following the natural or divine order. Humans, on the other hand, eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, thereby gaining intellect, and thus become conscious of their nakedness. Quote, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked. And they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths." Unquote. This is a quote from the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, which makes up half of the Christian Bible, being referred to as the Old Testament by Christians. It's interesting, though, to think if God, the Divine One, is omniscient or all-knowing, as it is referred to in Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism being defined on Google as, quote, "belief that union with or absorption into the deity or the absolute or the spiritual apprehension of knowledge inaccessible to the intellect may be attained through contemplation and self-surrender," unquote. As it is referred to in the Kabbalah, because that means that the divine already knew Adam and Eve were going to eat of the fruit, and their eating of the fruit was actually part of the divine order. The concept of the non-duality between God and creation is also represented in the Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides' book, Guide for the Perplexed. Quote, "Know that this universe, in its entirety, is nothing else but one individual being, that is to say, the outermost heavenly sphere, together with all included therein, is as regards individuality beyond all question a single being." Unquote. These teachings of the Tao, Brahman, Gnostic texts, the Nag Hammadi, and Kabbalah all refer to mystical theology. In Islam, this mystical theology is called Sufism. In the unlimited divine concept, God is referred to as Wahat al-Wujud, or the unity of being. In the Quran, the holy text of Islam, it states God is one, the eternal God. He begot none, nor was he begotten. None is equal to him. Unquote. Quantum physics attempts to create a similar theory in quantum field theory. I personally do not see how science will ever get to proof of this concept beyond theory, for it is the unlimited, and science measures the limited. This concept of limitlessness, being the definition of God, is nothing new. It is called the ontological argument for the existence of God. It brings to mind some new interpretation of God, though, not as a father figure, as I mentioned in my retelling of Adam and Eve, but as something that all religions can share. This is what's known as the perennial philosophy. Perennial being defined as lasting infinitely. The belief that all religions share an aspect of the truth and of God. Each religion is created by man, thus each one is limited. The perennial philosophy, defined by Merriam-Webster as the philosophical tradition of the world's greatest thinkers from Plato, Aristotle, and Aquinas to the modern successors dealing with problems of ultimate reality as the nature of being, and sometimes emphasizing mysticism. So the perennial philosophy can be seen through the lens of each religion, but follows no creed other than the obvious belief in a consistent, eternal religion. None of them are right or wrong, but rather an aspect of the truth. Through the lens of the perennial philosophy, using Christianity as an example, we can analyze many of life's dilemmas. If not applied to life, is there a point to philosophy? I will use a series of essays and journal entries to analyze some familiar concepts, the afterlife, miracles, and sin, as well as a possibly not so familiar concept, that of Christ consciousness. These entries are not debating or claiming that Christ is real, as in brought into existence, manifest as a human being, but rather as a role model of perfection on earth, as well as the teacher of oneness, of the true nature of humans as aspects of the whole, the unlimited, the all, the Tao, the Brahman. This aspect of his teachings is called Christ consciousness, a realization of the divine within each of us. A letter to a Franciscan priest. I'm contacting you because I saw some of your videos on YouTube and your demeanor was gentle. I had a conversation with a local priest and we got started off on the wrong foot. I didn't know how to properly explain myself. I still have doubts on that. I'm on an earnest journey from disbelief to faith, and I have yet to reach faith. Faith, to a vocal atheist, is one of the stupidest things in the world. They want cold, hard facts. Notice I said they, and not we. I believe in God, for the sake of briefness, I will define as the unlimited consciousness of all of existence. What do I struggle with? Prayer, ritual, the afterlife, the concept of sin, the grandiose nature of certain traditions, the concept of exclusivity. There's something I very much like about this Franciscan brothers, which is that they don't limit themselves to quiet contemplation in solitude apart from society. I feel like the ascetic life is much more humble than some ways of being Christian, but the purely ascetic life can't be lay life. I'm trying to learn what I can to bring asceticism into my daily life. I'm on a path that started with me being raised Catholic, abandoning religion, and coming back to religion and spirituality. I see the trend of religious decline from this perspective. Science and rational thinking took over where belief, faith, and intuition once stood as a pillar of society. I see people struggling with a sense of place, purpose, and belonging. I'm very skeptical still, which I see as a good trait, but I'm open-minded as well, leaving my path very uncertain. I'm interested in having extended conversations with somebody who is willing to deal with the skeptic in me and realize my good intent. I have lots of doubts in organized religion, but I also realize that the world needs something other than what is happening right now. On this path, I counsel others, document my journey, and teach guitar, all while trying to overcome my own wounds and mental health issues. You may not be the one to talk to, maybe you're too busy, but I wish to speak with somebody. Maybe you know who to connect me with. Carrying the cross. Suffering is universal. In chapter 22 of The Imitation of Christ, Thomas A. Kempis says, "Why are you so distressed when events do not turn out as you wish and hope? Is there anyone who enjoys everything as he wishes? Neither you nor I, nor anyone else on earth. There is no one in the world without trouble or anxiety, be he king or pope." Unquote. Suffering is not a disease, but rather an inherent part of life. In modern psychology, if one suffers greatly enough, it is labeled a disorder. If you don't suffer from it, you don't go see the doctor. For the treatment of mental disorders, we rarely seek preventative care. Depression and anxiety could be labeled the scourge of the modern world. They are clinical terms for a general condition. I believe that if everyone who suffered went to see a psychoanalyst, we would run out of psychoanalysts. In this way, suffering is not a psychological problem, but a far greater social problem. It is essential to the physician's art that he should not discover diseases where none exist, unquote, Jung states in Modern Man in Search of a Soul. He realizes the far greater problem. Modern man has suffered an almost fatal shock, psychologically speaking, and as a result has fallen into profound uncertainty, unquote. Nietzsche's infamous line, "God is dead," is not Nietzsche killing God, but a realization that religion has begun to fade in the era of enlightenment, in which science and rationality has taken over what was ruled by religion and superstition. Many people, especially atheists, would claim that rational thinking is perhaps the best way of thinking, that any other form is intellectual suicide. But that couldn't be further from the truth, seeing as the best form of thinking is a happy balance between intuition, the heart, and logic, the brain. Buddhism states that the middle path is indeed the best way to go in any given scenario. Do not overindulge or deprive yourself, but get what you need. Jung goes on to say, quote, "The various forms of religion no longer appear to the modern man to come from within," unquote, and that man, quote, "tries on a number of religions and convictions as if they were Sunday attire, only to lay them aside again like worn-out clothes," unquote. When we each struggle, when things get out of our control, which is bound to happen, we reach for something to hang on to, as Radiohead sang, quote, "You are my center when I spin away," unquote. Religion at one point was that center. It provided us meaning. That meaning slowly vanished and was even dealt a further blow with the dawn of existentialism as portrayed in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, which is often interpreted as the pointless wait for God, but can also be seen as an urging to do something with your life, for if you are waiting for something miraculous to happen, you missed the point. Psychology has stepped in as a scientified version of religion, as Jung states, quote, quoting a Protestant minister, I may say, nowadays people go to the psychotherapist rather than to the clergyman. unquote. In that respect it fails, for it still provides no insight into the meaning of life. It seems as there is no center when we spin away, but I see one. Spirituality. I told you in the introduction that sometime I define spirituality, and I'm going to, but not in the form of a simple sentence. Spirituality is personal. Religion is public. Each religion attempts to grasp at something, to answer some questions, to provide some insight into life. Spirituality is about experience, a personal sense of things. To be spiritual does not mean you have to believe in a dogma, doctrine, afterlife, or God, such as an anthropomorphized being. It means you see the forest for the trees, that you see the relation of each unique thing to the whole picture. In Taoism, the yin-yang symbol symbolizes the concept of mutually arising things. There is a classic Western philosophical question, quote, which came first, the chicken or the egg, unquote. The answer is both. To many, that's a foreign concept. Each implies the other and is a necessity of the other. In this way, the internal and the external also imply each other. You can't have a human without an environment, for if a human was all alone in the universe, it would still be in an environment, space. Once we realize that our inner world and our outer world are intrinsically linked, we can begin to see the way each thing in this universe is connected. I often, when counseling people, use an analogy of rippling water, saying something to the effect of, each action, each person influences everybody and everything around them. By each action or non-action, they begin a ripple effect that has a subtle but definite effect on everything and everyone. Each way you behave towards a person affects them, and they affect others, and they affect others. And in that way, the words you say can reach the ears of the president or the pope. I often think of something very meaningful to me, and that is regarding what I am doing in this life, what I am leaving behind. Am I making a difference? Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust concentration camps, discusses in his book Man's Search for Meaning how, quote, in the words of Nietzsche, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how, unquote. People often search for some tensionless state, as Frankl puts it, but what man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. In my journals at one point during what I would call a spiritual experience, I wrote something to this effect. You make your life. Viktor Frankl outlines a whole theory which he calls logotherapy, in which a therapist, instead of simply attempting to cope with the suffering inherent to this, the individual searches instead for a meaning. Some people seem to interpret existentialism as a philosophy of nihilism, a meaninglessness of life, which can lead to hedonism, the search for pleasure's sake. I see it differently. I see that we create our own meaning. According to mainstream theology, for Jesus, his suffering of the Passion, of the 14 stations of the cross, and his subsequent death had a meaning. He was the Redeemer of mankind. He had a powerful reason to continue. He believed thoroughly in the divine order, God's will, to the point of death. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he begged for God for any other way than death, thus connecting us to him. Even the Son of God had doubts and struggled with his meaning. In this way, faith is important. Not faith in a God necessarily, but faith in something bigger than oneself. There are Christian ascetics, or monks, who practice self-harm, fasting, and abstinence as a way to bring them closer to God, imitating Jesus' suffering. One such example is St. Francis of Assisi, who in his biography by St. Bonaventure used to try new ways of punishing his sensual desires by afflicting his body as if he were always beginning again. Mortifying the flesh, sleeping with a stone for a pillow, and wearing thin clothes in the cold. This kind of martyrdom, suffering for God, probably seems unreasonable, and no doubt it is, for causing your own suffering is no way to become a martyr. Like many things in life, by attempting to do something, trying to force it, you actually negate the possibility. The same can be said for reaching nirvana in Buddhism, the state of mind in which realizes they are not suffering, they just thought they were suffering. This theory in Buddhism is far-reaching as suffering is, and uses a Vedic medical theory, which is still used in modern medicine. The treatment involves 4 truths, the first being that suffering, disease, is a normal part of life, inseparable from happiness. This is the symptom for which the patient goes to the doctor. The second truth being that suffering comes from a desire for more than one has. This is the cause. The third truth being that there is a remedy for this suffering, a prognosis. And the fourth being the eightfold path, the treatment. You may think that is unreasonable to stop wanting, but that is indeed the goal of Buddhism. Quote, one who doesn't cling to sense pleasures like water on a lotus leaf or mustard seed on a needle's point, him I call a Brahmin, states the Dhammapada. a collection of the Buddhist teachings. To attempt to get rid of suffering, we must go beyond the realization of attachment to things of this world as futile and destroy these conditioned attachments. We are conditioned to believe so many things, that for capitalist society, money and success are the goal, and that these bring happiness. Buddhism proposes that nothing can be further from the truth, for the more you get, the more you want, and the more you want, the more you want. For instance, in a world of pure happiness, humans would measure happiness, rating it on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being 1 being, I'm doing okay, 10 being, I'm fucking awesome. If you're at a 1, what do you want? A 10, right? What if you're at a 10? You want a 20. It never ends. In this way, Thomas Kempis was right when he said, there is no one in the world without trouble or anxiety, be he the king or pope. Happiness is relative to one's situation. Even the poorest can be as happy as the richest. If one gives up all attachments, though, what does one have left to hold on to? Himself, and perhaps something even more stable, the divine. Putting all our hopes in a person or object are some of the silliest things we can do, for everything is transient, right? Everything is transient, but there is one constant, the unlimited. Doubt. Right now I'm suffering from a huge episode of depression. It's been going on since about 1 or so weeks after I began writing this book, and it's only getting worse. I'm going to talk about something I certainly struggle with, and that is lack of faith. I've always been a tad rebellious. I'd say I qualify for oppositional defiant disorder, and I frequently show complete disregard for others' opinions or ways of thinking. This has been sinking within me recently, practically vanishing. I doubt even my own ways of looking at the world. It's as if I don't have the balls to speak my opinion anymore. One of my opinions may at first seem unconventional, blasphemous even, but in the context of many traditions makes perfect sense. I've taken hallucinogens and spoke with God and seen divine things. In Christianity, this would seem especially wrong, as mind-altering substances are frowned upon. That would be putting it lightly in many Christian traditions. The truth is, I've been studying the concept of prophecy and hallucinations and ecstatic seizures. I've come close to an explanation. First, let's define prophet as a messenger. It doesn't mean they are divine or angels, merely that they convey a message to humanity. The term, as used in Judaism and Christianity, takes it one step farther, in that they are witness to something divine. And through that, they receive the message they are meant to convey. To atheist, prophecy comes with a simple explanation. They had hallucinations. That doesn't mean anything significant to me, as hallucinations could be the divine's way of communicating. There are neurologists who speculate that what the Old Testament prophets experienced were ecstatic seizures in which they were overtaken by these visions. My logic works like this. So what? If there is a divine thing in this universe and it needs to guide or to give a message, wouldn't it be likely it would use the same neuronal pathways that all our senses are experienced through? I don't believe that hallucinations are an easy explanation for anything. If we have senses that are processed through our brain, hallucinations are no different. There doesn't need to be a magic trick in which an angel appears. For all that needs to happen is for an individual to experience the appearance of an angel. Almost every prophet received their insight while alone. Muhammad in the cave, Moses on Mount Sinai, Jesus in the desert. This strikes me as interesting because when I've taken the hallucinogens, all but one of my spiritual experiences has occurred while alone, even immediately subsiding before a person entered the house. In fact, I don't believe my hallucinogenic experiences are average. I think they could be ecstatic seizures brought on by a combination of the hallucinogen and my psychiatric medication. The combination can cause something called serotonin syndrome, which can include seizures. I've experienced them enough times to deem them safe enough for me, but wouldn't recommend the combination or dosages I take to others. Dostoevsky, who himself had ecstatic seizures, said something to the effect of, I'd rather die from my visions than have never had them. The strange thing is that even in non-religious people, the ecstatic seizures seem to be linked to religious qualities. The first experience I had on dextromethorphan, a dissociative hallucinogenic anesthetic commonly used in cough syrup, was of a non-dual oneness and utter bliss. I saw a rip in the very fabric of the world and a giant plush penguin operating cars and birds and rain as a puppet master. You say that to someone and they'll say you're crazy. These experiences on dextromethorphan, DXM for short, are nothing like LSD experiences, which I've had multiple of. There was no ebb and flow of textures or colors. These visions were clear, as if these things were flesh and blood, or in this case, tear and penguin. This experience caused me multiple physical issues which I was not prepared for and were rather frightening. Ataxia, inability to coordinate limbs and walk, lack of dexterity, I couldn't write, and whatever it's called when you can't urinate. For catheters are very uncomfortable, especially on hallucinogens, which heighten the sensitivity to stimuli. The second experience worth noting was horrible, dark, and paranoia-inducing. I saw demons on the television screen, and things manifesting on the TV that made no sense. All of this is hard to describe because our way of describing things is rather limited. I thought it was the collapse of society, a lawless world where everyone shoots anybody who comes on their property. Hospitals are overbooked, people are abandoning houses to go south before winter hits. Maybe it was a vision of things to come, maybe a reflection of the sinister aspects of society. I tried to describe to my parents what was going on, but there was no explaining the feeling I could see through the bullshit, the Matrix. You think I would have stopped after that, but I longed for the oneness, the feeling of connection with all of creation, which psychonauts call ego death and Christian mystics refer to as ego annihilation, and some call Christ consciousness. The third major experience, I thought I was Jesus, which is not something you tell people without a darn good explanation. I didn't have a good explanation. I just knew what I felt was a union with the divine. As somebody unaware of traditions outside Catholicism, how could I even begin to interpret what was going on? The fourth experience, I didn't use the term Jesus, but I used the term prophet. It was after this experience was fading that I spoke with a spiritually gifted individual from Peru, somebody who in their own culture may be referred to as a shaman, who gave me 4 pieces of advice: to accept my visions, to realize that everybody has a mission to change the world, to stay on psych meds or people will say I'm crazy, to find a spiritual teacher. The fifth major experience, I experienced what I would call suspension of reality, which is pretty much impossible to actually put into words. The sixth experience, I spoke with God, the divine, the collective unconscious, my unconscious, whatever you want to call it. I'll call it God. It told me to be more humble, which I found sort of oxymoronic, seeing as I was talking to God. I felt singled out, special. I'm not, though. We each have the potential to speak with God and shed our egos. I'm frustrated in finding out how to do this without hallucinogens, but have been researching breathwork, meditation, and contemplative prayer. The truth about hallucinogens? They are a temporary window into the nature of reality. How do I shatter the glass forever? That's what I want to know. That's nirvana. That's theosis. That's all of this stuff I've been learning. I truly believe there is no one way to get the answer, but many. I'm doing my best to find what works for me. When I get there, I will inform you. Currently, though, I'm consistently doubting my own experiences because of other people's opinions, which I need to stop doing or I'll go crazy. We believe a lot of things that we can't see, and I've seen things some wouldn't believe. That's my experience I'm going off of, and I need to have faith in my own experience. A letter to my brother. There's no real way for me to describe what I experienced other than to say this: reality is not as it seems. This ineffable quality seems to be a hallmark of the divine, because language is just a measurement of the smaller things in life. I'm speaking of the big picture. Simulation theory comes close to an explanation. I've seen the glitches. It's funny, actually, the divine. A lot of humor in equal parts pathos and awe. Some may claim it was just the result of a hallucinogen, but I implore them to reevaluate the word just, as it downplays the importance of hallucinogens in the matter. They may be a shortcut to the divine matrix game simulation, but they are certainly one way there. Maybe that's how microdosing works. It alleviates some of the weight of living in the game by transcending the game. Much love, Peter Jack Benson. A very brief history of Christianity. First off, there were Jewish people. In Israel and the surrounding areas, there were multiple sects of Jewish people. The Hebrew Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, includes the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, the Nevim, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, a collection of other writings that didn't fit the other 2 categories. Rabbinic Judaism also had the Talmud and oral teachings. The 3 main groups of Jewish people were Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. The Essenes are credited by scholars as the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and some scholars believe John the Baptist and Jesus were Essenes. Essenes concentrated on ritual purity, such as baptism. Jesus was a Jewish man, often called teacher, rabbi, by his followers. I've told you his story already. His followers, the 12 disciples, as well as random people and a man named Paul who had a vision, began spreading the word about him after he died. There were and are as many different types of Christianity as there are Christians. Is a Christian a follower of Christ or a follower of Christianity? What does a Christian have to believe about Jesus to be considered a follower of Jesus? Each sect or denomination has different beliefs. The early Christians were split into 4 main groups: Ebionites, Marcionites, Proto-Orthodox, and Gnostics. Some of these had physical churches, others, such as the Gnostics, did not, and were present in the other 3 facilities. Those terms were not necessarily used by the people themselves, but by people describing the group. The Proto-Orthodox won and split into Catholicism and Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox. The winner of the battle got to decide what is considered a heresy, a term often regarded as negative but truly just means choice or school of thought. What is blasphemous? They got to decide what books made it into the Bible, and there are many different versions of the Bible, with different books included or different wordings and translations. The Catholics did not stay the universal church, as Catholic means, but split off into different movements, often called Protestant movements. These include but are not limited to Quakers, Baptists, Mormons, who actually have an additional text, Anglicans, Pentecostals, Methodists, Lutheran, and many more. Some have drastic differences from Catholicism, others more subtle. I'm not here to list all the details of each denomination and how they differ. There are many books that go into that. Early Christianity to me is the most fascinating, as it wasn't a solid thing. It truly still isn't, but people pretend it is. Many early Christians were ascetics, monks, who ventured into the desert, living either alone or in groups. They were called the Desert Fathers. There were and are Jews who believed Jesus was some kind of Messiah, though beliefs regarding his divinity, whether he or not he was the Son of God, are still questioned. Jesus, after all, was a Jewish man, albeit one who was critical of some of the Jewish sects at the time, such as the Pharisees and Sadducees. They killed him for his blasphemies. There are yet other believers who didn't follow Jesus at all. They followed John the Baptist, the ascetic who baptized Jesus, so they are technically not Christian at all, but are considered the last remaining Gnostics. Due to the release of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, which were Gnostic texts found in Egypt, Gnostic is an ambiguous word, as it simply refers to gnosis or knowledge and is regarded as secret teachings. There could certainly be a resurgence in Gnosticism. The Mandaeans, the ones who follow John the Baptist, do not accept converts, so they have no steady growth, but their population is in fact declining. The Jewish people have continued their tradition, but some see Jesus as the Messiah or Savior, not necessarily the Son of God, though. In the surrounding area, a man named Muhammad started preaching and writing during the 1600s AD, creating Islam. The followers of Islam are called Muslims. I will not be going into their history in this book, but I will say this: all Jews, Christians, and Muslims follow what could be agreed to be the same God, all including various figures throughout Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions going all the way back to Abraham. I will further discuss my thoughts on Jesus and Gnosticism in the section My Own Personal Jesus. Let me drink some ginger ale. A letter to a perennial philosopher. You don't really know me, but I asked you a question a while ago about ecstatic seizures, and you were kind enough to respond. I also read a book you edited, which featured an article by you about the perennial philosophy in psychology. Just yesterday, or maybe it was this morning, I received an email notification in which you shared a paper you wrote. Don't ask me the title, I'd have to rummage around in my files to get it. I'm a firm believer in synchronicities, and seeing as you have a unique perspective and education on the perennial philosophy and psychology, I'd be curious to speak with you or get your feedback. I usually make people videos in which I introduce myself, but instead I'm going to write you a letter. To be honest, today I've been sort of lost and frustrated, which isn't uncommon the last couple of weeks. I've been sheltered from the world for the last couple of years. I do virtual peer support and teach guitar to 2 students, and I write. Since I left my last job and applied for disability for mental health issues, including bipolar disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder, I'm writing a book about religion and spirituality, about my journey from Catholic to agnostic to I don't know. Do people actually call themselves perennial philosophers? That seems weird. I know that the people I've heard speak of the perennial philosophy say that you can acknowledge the truth in all religions, but in the end you have to follow one path. I'm not at a point where I can confidently choose a path, though. I'm learning lots. Over the last couple of years, I've read a lot of books and watched a lot of shit on YouTube, everything from speaking events to college lectures and interviews with religious folk. I'm very grateful to Alan Watts has so freshly transmitted teachings regarding Buddhism, Taoism, and Hinduism, which I read in an instant. But as far as Judaism, Islam, and Christianity go, he hasn't done much. I have 2 books of his on Christianity, but they are very stale, nothing like the books The Way of the Zen, the book, and the Tao the Watercourse Way. I'm on a path investigating those, in particular Sufism, Judaism, Quakers, and Greek Orthodox. I know you can't decide my path for me, but I'm curious what you'd have to say about writing a book attempting to show both believers and non-believers my journey and my thoughts in the perennial philosophy. I'm not a scholar in the matter. I have a degree in recording music, but I feel somebody needs to write for the masses. It's a little arrogant to think it's me, in a more simplified way, in a relatable way, perhaps even a slightly blasphemous way. It's hard to avoid blasphemy in a world of strict Catholics, and it's hard to relate religion to atheists, some of which are more anti-theist than atheist. It's not simply that they don't believe, but they are actually against belief. In the end, who is my audience? I don't know. And maybe I won't know until I finish the book and attempt to find a literary agent. I've published before, but on Amazon, where I was my own editor, formatter, and marketing department. The paper of yours I read today mentioned the spiritual void we are experiencing, the gap between the scientification of the soul, psychology, and what people actually need. There are so many who echo this, including Jung and Gabor Mate. It's not hard to notice it. It's hard not to notice it, I mean. The initial experiences that launched me into this journey were hallucinogenic, spiritual, and entheogenic. I know that many people warn that such things provide unearned knowledge, and I don't entirely disagree, but I realize their potential to open the eyes of the soul, of ego death, vision, seeing through the game of the Matrix, whatever you want to call it. As a young boy, I wanted to be a priest that connected with God and helped people. When I became an agnostic in my early teens, I wanted to be an author. As a senior in high school, I applied to college for secondary English education. My college experience involved lots of drugs and alcohol, which I started abusing early in high school, which were my way of coping with the suicide attempt of my friend and the end of a relationship. I stayed on the straight and narrow for 2 years, in which I got a recording degree, thanks to my straight-laced boyfriend at the time. I moved across the country, got a job, got a therapist, and got engaged. I ended up moving back to Wisconsin, where I was raised and currently live. Got more jobs, struggled with drugs and alcohol, even more, and ended up in the psych hospital for my 3rd suicide attempt. I never attempted suicide again. There was only one day in which I felt that hopeless in the last decade. The hallucinogens were my attempt at staying away from the alcohol and pills. In the end, it's weird, because they've led me to Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Maimonides, and Al-Ghazali. I told the priest all this, and he told me the hallucinogens were leading me to the hell. I told him, "You shall know him by his fruits." I know I wouldn't be where I'm at if it weren't for those experiences, and for that I'm grateful. I can't depend on them forever, though, so I'm at an odd point where I'm not sure what direction to take, what to delve into next, what I need to learn more about, what I need to discover. Every once in a while my hypomania sets in and I'm inspired. I don't actually know if it's the hypomania that comes first or second. Maybe the inspiration fuels the mania. It sets me in a direction, and I'm grateful for that. When I get lost, I lose hope, and I know that the answer is truly within me. In the end, maybe I just need to type this up to get it out of my head. I don't know that I'll send it, but I know this is going into the book. I write better when I have an audience I'm speaking to, especially a specific person. I appreciate you taking the time to read this, and if I receive no response, that's fine. That's what the Tao intends. I enjoyed your paper very much and hope you're doing well. Much love, Peter Jack Benson. Next is A Letter to Jesus. A Letter to Jesus. This is no doubt the most daunting letter in many ways, simply because of who you are. It shouldn't be difficult, though, should it? If everyone can have a personal relationship with you and a direct connection to the divine, talking to you should be like talking to myself. Am I supposed to write as if you don't know me, or as if we're acquainted? Did you know that once, when I experienced ego death, I thought I was you and that somehow I would change the world? The funny thing is that now I realize I am divine in you, and I are parts of the same body. The same energy runs through each of us. People may have thought I was crazy those 3 days. They didn't understand, and neither did I. It wasn't until the fourth experience that I got any true guidance, and from there the world opened up to me, all the knowledge from all these traditions. I'm coming closer and closer to some kind of resolution, if such a resolution is possible. I think I may have found your truest followers in the Quakers. It seems closest to what I believe you would have wanted your followers to do. Much of the Christian world has gone crazy, but I'm sure you realize that. I'm also sure you realize how many have fallen from faith. Maybe that is a crucial part of everything, of rebuilding what your teachings can be for the world. Your teachings aren't technically Christian, though, are they? But rather universal. I think the universality of your teachings is what Christians and atheists alike are missing. It's like we need a wave of kindness out there, a wave of relief from suffering, and I know that those waves are within us. How do we tap into that? Some say prayer and worship, some say meditation. I don't think prayer and worship are necessarily the answer, and I don't think meditation is, and I think meditation is too inaccessible. Service to our neighbors could be great, but people are overworked and people don't want to help or know how. So much of the world revolves around money. I already know what you'd say to that. The gay world is interesting, right? What would you say about that? I don't think you'd be against all the gays, but rather just the greedy, shallow ones. So many gays just want a companionship but don't know how to go about it. Your teachings of love are what we should follow. You are a role model after all. In some ways, I'm thankful for my single life. It allows me to do my work for you and others. I wouldn't mind a companion, but I stopped dreading being alone a while ago. I have no idea what you'd say about trans people, but I know you would love them. You wouldn't treat them as if they're evil or worthless. If you're aware of everything that's going on, you must be dumbfounded. Racism, rape, technology, violence, and guns. The technology has the potential for good, but I rarely see it used that way. For most people, it has destroyed social interactions, not improved them. I think of you and your friends at dinner, laughing and talking. Now we're always on our phones. If you came around now, plopped down in America, what would you think of the church, and what would the church think of you? You'd still be your authentic self, defying the norm, and for that the church may not accept you. They'd call you crazy or heretical, just like they did before. It's sad, really, because I like you, love you, and here are all these people who don't understand. I can't make them understand. Do you think telling my story is worth it? I think so. I still ebb in and out of doubt and frustration. How did you have such strong faith? Or did you? I've struggled so long with addiction, relationships, and life. How do I surrender to you? Or do I? What is the authentic me stripped of all ego characteristics? Am I still stubborn, skeptical, and creative? I wouldn't say I'm very creative anyways. I document my experiences, not manufacture them. I could ask you silly questions. Will I ever find love? When will I die? But those seem stupid and irrelevant and meant for a psychic. Should I thank you for helping me thus far? I do thank you. I don't know that I'm actually sorry for everything the Bible would label as sin, but I'm sorry for some stuff. Hurting the ones I love. I don't take your forgiveness for granted. I hope to do the same for others. That means I have to stop holding grudges. I will do my best. Do you actually listen when people pray? What are you? Are you a historical figure? That doesn't matter, actually, though. You are the divine within each of us. I used to use the term prophet to describe myself. Is that what I am? Are the hallucinogenic experiences actually related to ecstatic seizures? An ecstatic is somebody who has the experience for the experience's sake. I concentrate on the message I bring back from the void. Was it that time I talked to God? Was it you speaking back? Was it my subconscious or even the unconscious? I haven't decided what to call it. Is that chicken of me? It seems like I'm fence-sitting, not accepting that it was God. He told me to stop being arrogant. How does one talk with God and not feel arrogant? Does this happen to a lot of people? Were you an average person? An average person who realized each of us is the son and daughter of God? Will it satisfy me to not have the answers? I'm on the cusp of something, I know that. I'm edging closer to finding you and myself. I never know what steps to take. I reach out to others. Is that good? The spiritual path must be walked alone, though, right? We are brothers, you and I, across time and space. We all are, all of humanity. Much love, Peter Benson. A letter to a monk on Mount Athos. Dear brothers, I do not speak or write Greek, so I'm using an online translating service as I'm not sure if many or any of you are comfortable with English. I'm writing to you because I have tried to reach multiple local monasteries and churches with no response. The documentary about life on Mount Athos inspired me to write again. I am trying to learn and practice prayer and contemplation, as well as learn about theosis. I've studied many YouTube videos, but they have not explained either subject in a way that I understand completely. I was hoping that a member of your brotherhood on Mount Athos could communicate with me in an earnest attempt to understand. Your community struck me as humble and calm, two traits not frequently found in society. I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to apply your way of life to those of us who do not live in monasteries. I hope you are doing well. Much love, Peter Benson. A letter to Jehovah's Witness. A band's debut album is often their best. Not necessarily their best songs, best recording quality, or best performances, but it captures the energy the band has. Right now I'm listening to the album Fever to Tell by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, their debut studio album. We all have something to tell, don't we? Yeshua had his Gospels or good news. Quote, "And Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and he taught in their synagogues, being praised by all." Luke 4:14-15. His teachings impacted the world like a burning fire. Quote, "I have thrown fire upon the world, and look, I am watching it until it blazes." Unquote. Gospel of Thomas, verse 10. The early Christians, Ebionites, Marcionites, Gnostics, and Orthodox, were such a confused, scattered bunch who each decided what they would believe and teach. Many of Yeshua's early followers braved the desert for its solitude and humbling quality. Some organized a church in his name. I've switched the CD to a mix of The Doors. Jim Morrison is singing of blood in the streets. It feels like that some days when I watch the news. Memorial Day alone had 2 mass shootings. What would Yeshua think of us now? Is he watching? Is he among us? The truth is that people killed Yeshua the first time around. If he came back again, I don't think the world's reaction would be any less abrasive. After all, he once taught to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Here in America, we're liable to get shot if we knock on the wrong neighbor's door. He taught us to give up all our possessions to the poor and downtrodden. Yet the primarily Christian right-wing Republicans are the least likely to support those people. He taught us not to judge others. Yet many Christians are taught to judge their homosexual neighbors and strip away their rights. He taught perhaps the most important thing of all. Quote, "The kingdom is inside you and it is outside you." Unquote. The Gospel of Thomas, verse 3. We are, each and one of us, a child of the light, an emanation of the Great One, the unlimited, ineffable God. John the Baptist prepared the way for Yeshua, fulfilling the prophecy of Elijah, and Yeshua taught the people. But they did not listen. Instead, they turned his most horrible day into an icon to hang on a wall. Yeshua didn't demand worship. I have come to spread the words of Yeshua that the Catholic fathers tried to hide all these years. Words of love. Next section is called Transcription of a Video to a Benedictine Priest. So hey, I'm Peter. I initially messaged you probably a long time ago, and somehow it got messed up and you accidentally forwarded me an email to a guy named Nick something. But I'm glad you did, because I've been looking to speak with someone. I'm not sure how I contacted you. I don't think it was by email. I think it was probably by snail mail. Possibly. I don't know. Somehow you got my contact information, but I don't see an email to you, so I've been wanting to open up with dialogue with somebody who's comfortable talking with me about things in a relaxed manner. I myself am on a spiritual journey, so I'll introduce myself a bit. I hope you understand what I mean, that I'm coming from a good place. I'm 33, I live in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. It's 2 hours northwest of Chicago. People from Chicago, for some reason, come here to fish. I don't know. There's a nice river, but there's also rivers between here and Chicago. I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school for 9 years. Around the age of 11 or 12, I thought, let's face it, a talking snake doesn't make sense. A guy rising from the dead doesn't make sense. If we were to pay attention to science, it doesn't make sense. So I questioned it, which I think is healthy. To not question everything we're told is to be a blind sheep. And I think it's healthy not only to question things, but to be open-minded, and that's where atheists fail.
If I've offended you, I hope you are still able to watch, because it is okay to be offended. It is okay to be uncomfortable. That's how conversations begin, how people grow. I think atheists are closed-minded, arrogant people because most frequently they're not just atheists, they're anti-theists. I'm talking about people who are vocally atheists, anti-theists. They're against belief. They're not just simply non-believers, but they're against belief, and I think that's closed-minded, and usually it's due to some kind of religious trauma, is a term that's coming up more and more. I don't know how to define that, but when I was like 6 or 7, I wanted to be a priest. I thought they had a connection to God and they helped people. And who doesn't want to do that? So I became an altar boy. When I decided I was agnostic, I thought, well, priest isn't going to be an option anymore. So I thought I'd be an author. And then I started dating someone in high school and thought, well, if we get married and have kids and stuff, I'll need a conventional job because authors don't always make it famous. So I thought, I'll become a high school English teacher. I remained, let me put a little note in here. That's a typo. So I thought I'll become a high school English teacher. I remained in two church music groups throughout my high school years, even though I was agnostic. I liked the music, and I didn't see anything wrong with the church. Over the years, I grew further away from the church because of the way it treats LGBT people. It's like it takes one sin and it demands perfection. That's not the way the world works. I don't believe it's a sin, anyways, because I think it's about love and it's not about sex. The word homosexual, as defined by current standards, did not exist from the time the Bible was written. You can argue with me all you want, but it didn't. It wasn't a concept. There were pederasts around in Greek times, right? But pederasts were a sexual relationship between an older man and a younger man. But that's not the same thing as homosexuality. I myself am asexual, but I am homoromantic, which means I'm romantically interested in men. But the Bible doesn't say anything about that. There's not a word in the Bible about being romantically involved with a man. I want a companion. I don't want sex. So in some ways, I'm really available for the priesthood because I don't care about sex one bit. But on the other hand, I wouldn't make it as a Catholic priest because I don't believe in Catholicism. It's complicated because I'm a follower of Christ. I ask you to take most people my age, I'm 33, right? Take a picture of the rooms. Bet most people my age and you will not find a person with a crucifix. I have one. It's my grandmother's. I have more religious texts than most too. 130. 30 are probably about Christianity because I study religion. I went through a lot of life struggles and mental health struggles and came to a point in life where I began having what I would call spiritual experiences. It led me to studying religion. As a whole, people in the West seem to forget there's more than one religion or two or three. They usually think of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam and forget about Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and Manichaeism and Mandaism and Zoroastrianism, Shinto, Jainism, Christianism, shamanism. There's a lot of isms out there. I've come closer and closer to Christ along my spiritual path. I would like the ability to talk with somebody about Jesus and Christianity in a way that I can come to a better understanding of prayer and contemplation. Of faith as an idea of faith as a concept. I don't believe in the concept of saving, of salvation. It means that one person's view is right and one person's view is wrong, and that's not the truth. There's many ways, many different ways of coming to the truth, and Christianity is one of those. I'm not here to bash Christianity. I counsel people as part of charity, and spirituality is a huge part of my counseling. I'm also a published author, and I'm working on a new book about spirituality, and Christianity is a huge part of my book. I'm not here to deter people from Christianity. I'm actually here to promote it in some way. I feel like I have much more to learn, so I thought I'd reach out. If you know someone who would be willing to, I would appreciate it. Hope you're having a good day. I had therapy today. You want to know more about me? I'm obsessed with movies, books, and music. I'm a guitar teacher, have a degree in recording music. Originally, I went to high school English teacher. Went to school to become a high school English teacher. But my best friend killed herself in college, and I got depressed and attempted suicide myself. Suicide is another thing I don't think is a sin. It's a symptom of depression. It's a symptom of suffering, a symptom of confusion, of being lost. I don't think anyone is going to hell for being lost. It means they are at the darkest place they'll ever come to. I help people who are in that place and help them get out of that place to find reasons and find a perspective on how to live. So, should I sing you something? I like to sing people something. I have to pick a song. Give me a second. I'll think about it. It's technically a secular song, but it's religious and spiritual, and that's why. Yeah. Singer-songwriter named Daniel Lanois. He's a French-Canadian who worked with the likes of U2 on 10 albums? And he worked with Emmylou Harris, a couple of Bob Dylan's albums, Neil Young's, Peter Gabriel's album So, the one with Sledgehammer. He's worked with a lot of well-known. He has worked with a lot of artists. He has had good solo career too, not quite as good as his production, but nobody's going to get as famous as U2 or Bob Dylan, right? Here's the song of his. I play it when I was in church. I was confirmed Catholic, baptized, First Communion, and everything. This was an Easter Sunday. It was packed back then. At least 1,000 people in this church. That doesn't happen so much anymore. We're lucky if we get 100 at my parents' church. I don't attend church currently. I do sporadically if my mom wants to go and she doesn't want to go by herself. But anyways, I have gone with, but I just feel out of place. A note on prayer. I always thought prayer and ritual were useless, and while I still haven't fully figured it out, there is a point to prayer, and that, I believe, is the concentration on the connectedness and the stillness of the universe. I began to say the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, 100 times at the recommendation of the kind Benedictine monk Anthony that I met due to a synchronicity online. I did this for days, especially late at night when I would walk due to my racing thoughts. After 300 or 400 times of doing the Jesus prayer unceasingly, I felt the connection to the divine. Theos is spoken of by Greek Orthodoxy, which I think is related to the nirvana of Buddhism, which I think is related to the Tao of Taoism. It is spoken of in my journals. 6/29/23. Early after midnight, I took a walk and continuously prayed the Jesus prayer. I felt a oneness with the universe and began sweating profusely. The serenity of the concentration on the connectedness was powerful. This must be hesychasm or something similar." Unquote. I think these things are related to agape, unconditional love, a love for all. It is that which connects us all, which for all our differences, I think is the point. A note on miracles and synchronicities. I have lately been experiencing a long string of synchronicities of things I believe meant to happen, linked but not by cause and effect across time and space. Carl Jung used the term to describe the experiences he saw his psychiatric patients having. There are too many to count. It has left me with a strange, nervous, almost sickening feeling in my gut of world change. People have been having dreams about me. I've been having visions. I've been meeting new people that don't make sense. You don't have to believe me, but I know what is happening to me, and it leaves me shaken. A note on faith. Faith has often been spoken of, in the age of science, as something to be ashamed of. Granted, though, science asks us to have faith in it. I believe that faith creates reality in those who believe it. It greatly influences what is real for the person. I believe it should come from personal experience and personal logic, out of skepticism and open-mindedness. Do not simply believe what others tell you. Do not simply believe what I tell you. That faith is shakeable. But faith from experience, faith even contrary to what others believe, that is powerful. Faith in groups is powerful as well. Think of it as the concept of manifesting. By believing it to be true, we can make it true. Know that faith in something that is harmful to others is still harmful to others. Belittling LGBT individuals, for instance. So don't let your faith cause hate and inequality. Also, remember that what you believe isn't necessarily true for others. For instance, if you believe you are a woman, but others see you as a man, this is discussing trans issues. Do not hate them for that and force them belief on them. Quote, "You shall know him by his fruits," unquote. After all, if it is my faith that my experiences on hallucinogens are correct, who is to judge that? Who is to say that it is some form of psychosis and not a spiritual experience? If your belief breeds happiness and love, then what is so bad about it?